I'm from the Pentland Centre for Sustainability in Business here at Lancaster, which is a crossover between the Environment Centre and the Management School. So the work I'm going to present today is part of the Soil Value Project, which is led by Jess, who's sat up there. And we're looking, this work is looking at modelling soils, particularly agricultural soils, and modelling soil biogeochemistry. So agriculture over the last 50 years, agricultural production has increased threefold, and it accounts for a huge portion of our land area. And agricultural practices significantly alter biogeochemical cycling, as we've just been hearing. So through cropping and grazing, we remove a lot of biomass, removal of nutrients. A fertilizer, we put additions of particularly nitrogen and phosphorus into these systems, and practices such as tillage change rates of decomposition. And these changes to the biogeochemical cycles significantly alter the ecosystem, with implications, as we've been hearing, for food security in relation to nitrogen and phosphorus limitations, but carbon's also been shown to sort of have an effect on our food productivity from soils. It has implications for water quality and availability, and also soil's been a huge store of carbon. It has implications for climate regulation. So, as we were hearing, it links to all the Sustainable Development Goals, but in particular in this project we're looking at these three, and in this talk it's linking towards zero hunger. So why do we want to model soils? Well, observations are great, but they only give us part of the picture, and that's really because of the spatial and temporal limitation of observations. If we want to fully understand soil processes and be able to predict soil change over long term, observations just aren't enough, and models can really help us with that. And also there's considerable variability in soils, and that's due to the complexity of soil systems and the numerous factors influencing soil change. So as we've just been hearing, it's not a case of if you put a load of nitrogen on a soil that you're going to increase your yields, and that's because there's lots of other factors involved. And observations, it's difficult to decouple the processes and the drivers from observations, and models help us to do that. So what are the key shopping lists, as it were, from models? Well, we have models, already of soil. Why do we want another model? So we have models of agricultural soil biogeochemistry, and they largely look at carbon cycling, and some of them carbon and nitrogen cycling. But really, soil biogeochemistry is interlinked, so we need integrated cycling of carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus. And we do have those kinds of models, but they tend to focus on natural systems and not agricultural systems. So we need an integrated CNP model that will do both agriculture and semi-natural systems and allow us to simulate land use change between those types of systems. So in this project, that's what we're trying to do, and we're looking at an existing model called N14CP, which is looking at cycling of nitrogen, carbon and phosphorus in natural ecosystems. The model operates over long time scales, so it's got a quarterly time step, and we run it from about the end of the last glaciation up to present day or onwards. And the inputs are pretty readily available data, so seasonal temperature and precipitation data, deposition of nitrogen and phosphorus. We input a land cover history and fairly basic soil type data. And for the natural system, or semi-natural systems, we simulate 4 plant functional types, which are broadleaf and coniferous forests, herbaceous vegetation and shrubs. And the model basically simulates net primary productivity, so accumulation of biomass, and moves nutrients through pools based on stoichiometric ratios between above ground biomass and topsoil and subsoil. So this next slide might be a bit scary, but I think, oh no, it's not the next one, it's the one after. Sorry, we'll get back to that. So what we've been doing with the model is as I said, adapting this so we can simulate also agricultural systems. So we've added 4 new plant functional types, which are sort of typical of temperate agricultural systems. So cereal crops, which things like wheats and barley, root crops like potatoes, legumes, peas and beans, and oilseeds, so oilseed rape and sunflower. And as I said, there's agricultural management practices, which is altering the cycling of these nutrients. So we've got cropping, fertilizer input, tillage, and grazing, and we also incorporate nitrogen fixation by legume crops. particularly as we're interested in food and yields and how biogeochemical cycles are influencing yields, we've also included an estimation of yield from net primary productivity. So previous studies have sort of looked at how you can estimate net primary productivity from yield. So we've turned that around because we already simulate net primary productivity. And that's just based on sort of a harvest index for these crop types. And that's why we've done it. So this is the scary side, but it's not so scary. In a nutshell, we've got the model simulates above ground stuff, the topsoil, which is the top 15 centimetres, and the subsoil, which is everything below that. And we've got these pools where the model stores nutrients and moves them around. And basically, we've got, in above ground, we've got biomass, which is split into coarse and fine biomass based on the lignin content and how readily that decomposes. And then when the plant grows, it's the model simulating net primary productivity, taking up nitrogen and phosphorus from the soil available pool, taking it into the biomass. When the plant dies, it goes into litter and decomposes in soil organic matter. So it's simple, really. And we've just added in, fertilizer addition, taking biomass out through cropping or grazing, and returning of that through crop residues and litter. So, as I said, observations are great, and we do need observations to understand if our model's doing anything reasonable. So what we've done is looked at several long-term agricultural experiments from Northern Europe. We've got 11 experiments, and each of these experiments has various plots where they've done different fertilizer practices, different tillage regimes, and looked at the effects of that on yield. The plots range, the temporal range, timescale that they're looking at ranges from anything from 1800 to sort of to present to just sort of 20 years. And the number of observations they've got at each of those plots varies in terms of how the frequency and just the number they've got over the timescale. So we've got soil, carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus. I've put that in brackets and I'll explain that in a moment. pH and crop yields. So those are the things that the model simulates. So we're comparing the model at these with these sites. And the sites cover the range of the plant functional types that we've added in, so these arable crop types and grasslands, and the range of management regimes that we've added into the model. So does it work? I could just say yes, but I should probably go in a bit more detail. So these are the observed and simulated soil carbon-nitrogen ratios and pH. So the thing to take from here is that the magnitude of the soil nutrients that the model's predicting are round about right, which I think is quite impressive, given that we're simulating the soil, remember, from the end of the last glacial period and taking it right up to now. So I think that's good. But so these data points are all the data points from all the sites. So we're looking, this is, so where you're seeing sort of the similar colours, those are the points taken from the same experimental sites. And the reason I put P in brackets is because the only P data, or phosphorus data we have, is Olsen P. So that's sort of a measure of kind of like a plant available phosphorus. Whereas it's not really comparable to something the model's simulating, so that's why it looks a bit funny here. We've actually been looking at trying to correlate the phosphorus with the plant available inorganic phosphorus, and we get a better correlation there. So I should have shown that graph, but never mind. And something else to note, so as I said, the original N14CP model was developed for natural and semi-natural systems, so this is taken from that paper. And so something to note that our squared values are slightly higher, not massively, but a bit. But I guess that's kind of good because it's what we would expect. So in the natural system, you've got your uncertainty of inputs in terms of nitrogen and phosphorus deposition. In our system, and the agricultural system, those kind of deposition inputs pale into insignificance when you're talking about adding fertilizers, and the inputs in our system, the agricultural systems, are much better, much better defined. So your inputs are probably more accurate. And also the stoichiometric ratios of the plant types in monocultural systems are probably better defined. So really we would expect to see a slightly better prediction of the model in agricultural systems than semi-natural systems. So that's okay. So the other thing is yields. Now you might look at this plot and think the model's not working. Hang on a minute. But actually it is. So this is really a case of what it does, I promise. It's really a case of what your model, what you're trying to do with your model. So the R-squared from value, this I haven't put up because it's not very good, but that's not the point. The model is simulating ballpark sort of yield figures. So the simulated values and the observed values, the average yields I've put down here, whilst the simulated are a bit lower, they are similar ballpark figures. And this is, it's the key message is what is your model trying to do? So the reason the R-squared values are low is because our model doesn't predict interannual variability of yields, but we wouldn't expect it to. The model's operating on a quarterly time step. It's not going to pick up, a serious drought or a really hot year where you've had great yields. It's not going to pick that interannual variability, so we wouldn't expect a high R-squared. We're looking for a model that can say, with this type of soil biogeochemistry, what's your ballpark yield? And the model kind of does that, so we're happy with it. And just to give you more confidence that our model works. So the other thing that we've been doing with this model, because obviously we've been validating it spatially, but we also want to see, does it work temporally as well? So this is one of the arable sites taken from Askov in Denmark. It's one of the longer term agricultural sites that we've been looking at. So the two things to note here, the diagram on the far side is showing soil carbon and nitrogen. So the magnitude of what the model's simulating is about right, and also the temporal trends where we're seeing a decrease in soil carbon or nitrogen. We're seeing that in the model also, so that's great. The yields, so as I said from the previous graph, the observed yields are slightly higher than the simulated, but we are picking up the change, the responsive yields in response to fertilizer additions, so that's good. And for a grassland site, a similar thing, we're getting the magnitudes right. In terms of a temporal trend, for this site it's a bit trickier to say, so for some of the sites I've only got, say, 3 data points, so picking up a temporal trend really from that is trickier. But in terms of the yields that we're getting, the observed and the simulated yields are overlaying each other, so good. So the model that we've developed here, the reason it's been useful is so we've now got a model that can simulate soil biogeochemistry over longer time scales, and simulate this change in land use from natural to agricultural land use and look at the implications of that, particularly for crop yields. And there's the parameters that are in the model, so these plant stoichiometries, there's no need for an individual site scale calibration, so we can apply it for regional scales and make regional assessments of the impacts of land use transitions and what implications this has for agricultural land management. And then obviously that relates to food security, as we've been talking about, and climate regulation, and a whole range of sustainable development goals. I'll finish there. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Right. Right, thank you very much. I think we've got time for one quick question.
Yeah, so you said and I forgot the first part, about the stoichiometry. You have the soil and plants?
Yeah, so the plants, the plant functional types are parameterized based on sort of literature values of the demand for carbon to nitrogen to phosphorus ratios for those plant types, and then in the pools it moves it around based on those stoichiometric ratios, the ranges that we would expect to see.